What a privilege to be here this week with each of you. And Sharon and I just count it a real high honor. I said the first night, and I feel it with all my heart, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else this week than right here. And then, as we've been saying in the last several services, but you have to realize why I keep repeating this. The Bobby and I haven't seen each other for 45 years. I don't think we've seen each other. He was in our wedding, and I'm not sure that we've seen each other since 45 years ago. I have a picture on my phone of the party, and there's been some real changes in both of us. But it's so good to be here and for every one of you. And to know that God cares and He's on the throne. What a privilege to be His. Thank you for everything. Thank especially Trent and Jeanette for all their kindnesses and food and a nice place to stay. And then all of you, just thank you for being here. We're turning to Luke, the Gospel of Luke, chapter 19, reading verses 41 through 44. Luke 19, 41 through 44. And as you're no doubt aware, we're jumping right into the passage that we know of as Palm Sunday. And Jesus is coming, and He's coming into the city. In verse 41, and when He was come near, He beheld the city and wept over it. What really is, that just stands out, is not what's said in this verse, but what is said as we read all about it. His disciples and the common man, those that were looking for deliverance from Rome, they were pumped. They were so excited, they were taking their outer garments off and making a carpet for Him. His disciples had been told by Him to go into the city and get a donkey that had never been ridden and bring it to Him. Tell the ones that say, "What are you doing with our donkey?" The master has need of it, and the owners would go ahead and let him bring the donkey. The disciples, just all these supernatural things. And up until this point, when He would perform a miracle, frequently He would say, don't go tell everybody about that. They would do it anyway. But then they would want to make Him king, and He would slip and get out from it. But all of a sudden it's changed. And He's allowing them to acknowledge Him as the king. Now, everybody is not excited. The religious leaders that wanted to do Him in were angry. The crowd was out of control. There's nothing they could do. In fact, they said, "Tell Him to shut up." And He said if they did, the rocks would cry out. But I want you to notice, with all the excitement, what Jesus did. Verse 41 again, and when He was come near, He beheld the city, and He wept over it. Now I want that to soak in for a moment. Imagine in this atmosphere of such joy, such excitement, the one they're so excited about is broken enough to weep. That doesn't sound like a joyful Palm Sunday for Him. He's the only one that wept like that. His critics were angry, but the vast majority of the people around there, they were so excited they didn't know what to do. And yet Jesus is weeping. And listen to what He says. saying, If thou hadst known, even thou at least in this thy day, the things which belong unto thy peace. Think about that word peace for just a moment. Friends, that is what we all desire. Many people don't know how to get it. Many people don't know the reality of it. But we want peace. He said, if you could know in this thy day, this is your day, he said, and there's things that belong to your peace, but now they are hid from thine eyes. It's here, but you don't see it. For the days shall come upon thee, that thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee round, and keep thee in on every side, and shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee, and they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest not the day of thy visitation. I'm sure that those that listened had no idea what he was talking about. To think about that beautiful, magnificent temple that's just indescribably beautiful and large, and people coming and going in all directions. And he's talking about something's going to happen to where this temple here, not one stone's going to be on top of the other. It's going to be so leveled. Lord, thank you for your presence. Thank you for your love. And one more time, Lord, in your mercy, would you touch me, Lord, and touch my words, touch my throat tonight, and give us a sense of your divine presence. Give us hearts that are open to you. In Jesus' name, amen. I do not like to shop. Now, there's exceptions to that. If there's a bookstore or an old junk shop that would have some books, maybe religious books, it would have to be religious books. I love to shop. It's kind of like fishing. Sometimes you just get nothing. But every now and then you say, wait a minute. What's on this hook? So I love that. But and I love to go to Goodwill and those kind of stores to look for those kind of books. And one more thing. Now you have to realize we have 21 grandkids, and the oldest one's 16. So what I do is let some people like you spend big dollars on toys, and then you use them a time or two and send them to Goodwill, and then I come shopping. That's what I like. And I love to find them and give them to our grandkids' birthdays and Christmases and all that. But outside of that, I don't like. Now, I admire people that are good wheeler-dealer kind of people, dickering for this. There's nothing wrong with that. The only thing that would be wrong is if I have something that Pastor Trent is interested in, and it's worth $5,000, and he knows it, and he points out the flaws to me, and it kind of asserts that it's not worth that much, and I sell it to him, and for $2,000 he's going to change it over for $5,000. That's wrong. But there's nothing wrong to say, this is what I'll give you, even if it's a lot less. But I just don't, if I'm going to buy something, what I want to do, and I'm not bragging about this because there's times I'd rather have someone else do my shopping. I like to just say, what do you need for it? Let me know, and then I'll decide. Now I know but that's just kind of the way I'm wired. If I go to a yard sale and Sharon says, would you take less? I want to go to the car. It was time for, I don't want to say a new vehicle because we've never had a new vehicle. She had a new vehicle before we were married. But once we got married, she didn't have the money to do that again. The first part's true. She did have a new vehicle. So our kids are small, and we need another vehicle. And so I began to get these magazines and kind of look through them. And this is back in the station wagon days. We've been minivan now for many years. But I looked through the magazines until the kind of car that I was interested in, and I was checking, and I was kind of getting prices. I realized as I looked kind of what ballpark figures were for what I had, what I wanted. But I opened the one magazine, and to my amazement was this beautiful station wagon. But the thing that amazed me about it was the price. It was quite a bit lower than I'd been looking at with others. And it was a nice looking car. The picture was there. It was a diesel, and I hadn't had a diesel, but that was a diesel, and I'd heard that, they're all right, they're good. And so I live in Shelbyville, Indiana, which is about 30 miles from Indianapolis. So the dealer, the guy's number was Indianapolis. So I called him. And sure enough, he still had the car. And I asked him some real intelligent questions like, is there rust? He said, oh, no, there's, and does it use oil? Of course not. And a few things like that. Now, I know enough to know that most cars have an engine in the front. That's not all of them, but I know most of them do. That's about it. So I said, well, I'm really interested. I want to come and see it, and I'm interested in getting it. He said, I'll tell you what. He said, I have a dealer's license. And he said, if you come and you want this car, when I write up the papers, you give me what I'm asking for here, and I'll write the paper up for a significantly less amount so that you won't have to pay as much in taxes. I said, oh, my, sir, no, I would not think of that. I said, I'm a Christian. And I said, that's not honest. I wouldn't do it. And he said, well, just trying to help you, suit yourself, whatever you want to do. And I felt kind of ucky about that. But I was proud of myself because I had clearly taken my stand. And so I went and looked at the car, and sure enough, it's a beautiful car. And you know how they do. They have it all specially perfumed and vacuumed and all something that would never look like that again with our family. But at least for the moment when you buy it. And I really liked the way it looked. And I said, well, I'll take it. And he said, okay. And he got the paperwork out, and he said, now, he said, like I told you, he said, I'm very willing to write up a lesser amount here for your taxes. I said, sir, I told you that I wouldn't do that. That's wrong. And I really felt very ucky about that. But I took my stand, and he said, well, all I'm doing is trying to help you, but he said, it's okay. And I thought, boy, he's spoiled just the way he did that. I just didn't feel good, but I hate the shop. And it's a nice car at the right price. And I paid, and everything was fair. Everything he wrote down, I paid him. I wish, if I would have only known that it used about as much oil as diesel, a true lemon. If I would have only known. Now, the truth is, I think God tried to help me. When I look back on that heavy feeling that I had, that I kept pushing out of the way, now I'm convinced that God, in His kindness, was trying to warn me. But I overrode that. If I could have only known. So many things that after it happens, that's our feeling about it. If I could have only known. Now, we have how many pastors here? We have two pastors. Anyone else? Two? The one that's been... Well, Unfortunately, I don't always do like I should in sermon preparation. So I know what Pastor Trent and probably Pastor Travis does. They probably take Monday to rest a little bit, and then Tuesday start focusing, and Wednesday and getting it all together, and Thursday But for me, have you ever heard of Saturday night specials? Well, they say they'll blow up in your face. But years ago, I didn't have it together Saturday. And any preacher knows that's not a good feeling. As the evening is coming on and you're just kind of struggling. And so I'm in my study and finally got to where I felt like, didn't have it all together, but I did feel like that it was enough together to go over next door. We lived right next to the church. Our parsonage wall, what would it be, Trent? The old church here, and that would be the church there, about that much space. Maybe not even that. And then out front, we had a wide porch and an awning over front, and then it was all sidewalk to the curb. And the railings come down here, and then we're right by the church. And our bedroom was right in this corner at that time. And I'm tired, and I know that I'm going to have to get up Sunday morning and kind of try to work that some. And so I go to bed, and I'm sleeping. And somewhere after 2 or 3 a.m., I hear a dog yapping. Now, all of you dog lovers, have mercy on me. All right? Have mercy. I know there's some dog lovers here. Nathan and Laura just started raising golden retrievers, and the other day they had 10, and within a few weeks they're going to have about 10 more. I told my grandkids, I'd like a couple of them, but I want to keep them at your house and I'll come see them. So it's yapping, and I tried to just kind of shut it out. But it's yapping right down, like our bedroom wall's here, and then steps are down here, and then about from me to Sister Nora, that's down there. That's down there where it's yapping. And so, I thought maybe it'll leave, but it didn't. It just stayed out there, just kind of yapping. And so I went to the door, and I saw it out in the darkness, and I opened the door, and I said, Get! And it didn't leave. I thought, well, I need to do something. So I went to the refrigerator. And I opened the refrigerator, went through it, and found a turnip. And the turnip was nearly as big as my fist, maybe not quite. And I'm left-handed. I don't have a real good arm, but when you're upset, So I got that turnip, came and opened the door, gave it another warning. I wasn't going to do it without a warning again. I said, Get away. And it stayed there. I said, okay, I've warned you. And I reared back and let that thing go with all my might. And it hit the awning and dropped right in front of the dog. So now I need to go out and be a man about it. So I cautiously opened the door, started going toward it, and I noticed some things. One, it was yapping, and I need to tell you that it was kind of in a pitiful yap. And I also noticed it was quite a small dog. And I could see that it wasn't being aggressive toward me. And then I saw why it wouldn't leave. Somewhere down the street, whoever owned that dog had one of these corkscrews, the metal corkscrews, you go like that and put it down in the ground with a chain on it to the dog. Some of you know what I mean. They had done that with that dog, and it had pulled it loose. And when it came by our porch with the railing, it got caught in the railing, and it couldn't get loose. And then I felt guilty. And I went back to the refrigerator, and I found a hot dog. I didn't throw it. I went very gently to it and apologized and offered it the hot dog. If I would have only known, I would never have acted like that. I would have had compassion on the poor dog. I would have wanted to help it. I would have wanted to release it from its chains. It irritated me. It really did. It was in my space, and it wouldn't quit yapping. But if I'd have known why it was yapping, I think I would have had some compassion. I can't tell you that I've always had the compassion that I should have. I'm sure I haven't. But I've thought about that more than one time. You know, sometimes people do things and act in ways and irritate you in ways that if we could only know all the things that in their life that cause that, perhaps we could do a better job ministering to them, caring about them, not getting upset maybe about how they might treat us, but see that here's a broken person, as irritating as they can be, as disgusting as they can be. And I think that what God is wanting me to do and you to do, even more than we do, is to pray that way. Lord, that's hard. That's not too hard for me to pray about some people that way. But just to be perfectly honest with you, occasionally I bump into someone that's very difficult. But when we can somehow begin to say, oh God, perhaps this person needs my compassion more than my irritation. I really think that would help us in our churches. If we could only know. You see, when Jesus said, if you could only know that this is the day of your peace, but yet you don't know about the visitation. Friends, there are things that happen in life that if we miss it, we may never get another chance. And sometimes it's that way with our children. You know, my parents did not come from Christian backgrounds. I've told you in this meeting that my mother was never loved, hugged, or kissed as a child. And her brothers were in and out of the penitentiary. Rough family, really rough. Rough. And my mother's younger sister married ex-convert. How many are familiar with Life magazine? You've seen that. Well, my Uncle Tommy was featured in Life magazine in the 60s. Several pages, as I recall, an article, pictures. He was in prison at the time, federal prison. But the reason they did the article with him is what he had done is he was a good-looking guy, and he would dress up sharp and go to Indianapolis to wealthy neighborhoods. Now, this is back in the 60s. So you have to go back and that where you had milkmen that would come to your door. Anybody remember that kind of thing? You know, that kind of thing. And it was just, and what he would do would be to case it out. So if Sister Dawn left a note to the milkman, hold the milk, I'll be gone for 2 weeks to see my son in Phoenix. Then that was something he knew that he could get in there those 2 weeks. And he had several things like that. And what Life magazine did with my Uncle Tommy is they interviewed him so he would give tips to people of what to be careful about. That people like him would not see while they're away how they could do things. He went to one place, and I think the lady had said that she would be gone to some state 2 or 3 weeks, and he pulled a moving van in there and took it down to the carpet. Just said, my aunt's going, I think the neighbor asked something, he said, well, my aunt's going out there. Well, my parents of you can know didn't trust him. And on a few occasions, my Aunt Judy, that's my mother's youngest sister, would come with Tommy on a Sunday, and they would come in the afternoon. And then Judy would go to church at night with my parents. But Tommy didn't go to church. And that left my parents in a dilemma. They didn't trust him. He had sticky fingers. And he wanted to just stay at the house while everybody else went to church. I was 12, 13, and I was as ungodly as can be. I never was ruined by peer pressure. I sought evil stuff from the time I was little. I don't understand that, but there's something in me that wanted to do that. So I was very glad to stay at home with him. And my parents allowed me to do that so that I could watch him so that he didn't steal from them. But if they could have only known what he was actually stealing. He was stealing what they valued above everything else, and that was me. Because I was really enamored with him. He's quite a guy. He's in Life magazine, and he would tell me the stories about the things he would do. He would tell me how he seduced women, how you do all that, and I mean, he was my hero. If my parents could have only known what was really at stake, they would have just let him take whatever he wanted to take out of their home while we were away in church, and I would have been in church. Oh, friends, sometimes we don't get a chance to do it again. And young parents, please listen to me. The day is coming that you don't want to look back on it and say, if I would have only known. You know, I almost hesitate to tell this, but I have read all the primary sources, and I can tell you that everything I'm saying is not exaggerated. But one of our heroes is Charles Wesley. And John helped him. So some of the hymns John could have had a part in, but it's agreed upon by the scholars that Charles was responsible for the most of it. And we sing those songs. And when they started their ministry, they were single guys that poured themselves in. They were mobbed. They were stoned. Charles was as straight as any itinerant preacher could be. What a hero. But Charles, in his late 40s, met a very fine girl that was 20 years or more younger than him. I'm not knocking that. But she was from a wealthy family. And they were Christians, but they were in the upper aristocratic part of society. Now, the Wesleys were a bit of that just because of their education, but not because of their money. So there was a little bit of a disconnect there. But this family was just very, very well off and had beautiful home. And they also were really influenced by George Whitefield. So their understanding of salvation was from a Calvinist position. They didn't believe or accept entire sanctification. And they were Calvinist. But Charles really thought the world of Sarah or Sally, and she did him. And when he began to court her, her mother required that if this was going to be, that he had to demonstrate that he had the financial resources to take care of her on a very, very nice level, way higher than the Wesleys were living. And, of course, before that time, everything that Charles wrote music and all that, all of it went into the work. And Charles so loved her that he began to press John on how we can make this happen. And John, and not only John, but the other preachers were all living just scratching to make it financially. But they made adjustments. They satisfied her mother, signed it. And so Charles had to receive a very nice salary that the other guys that were preaching were not able to get. And that caused some issues, plus doctrinally. But it even got sadder because he happened to have a couple boys that were absolutely incredible musical geniuses. Charles was the oldest one. 10 or so years later came Samuel. And I'm talking about from the time they're about 3 years old. And by the time they're much older than that, in London, these famous musicians that would hear some about them were absolutely amazed and actually asked permission to be Charles's teacher and then later on Samuel's. Free of charge. These guys were so incredible. And what Charles began to do, in spite of the fact that the Methodists were very troubled by it, and John pled with him and warned him about it, he began to have concerts in his home. And the concerts brought the elite of England and London in to listen. And it began to move Charles in other circles. John tried to stop that. But Charles said, I can't anymore stop my son's musical ability than cutting their fingers off. They're gifted of God to do this. And they became famous. And they also became famously sinful. The Methodist class meeting where just the Methodists met. And now you got to, I said some of the beginning so that you would know some of the tension between the preachers and what Charles was doing financially. And he did not send his boys to be part of the little Methodist circle of class meetings and those despised Methodists. Charles was more worried that the Methodists would leave the Church of England. And the tale of those boys is tragic. Samuel got hooked up with an older lady, lived with her without marrying her for 10, 12 years, married her, then had children from a maid and left her, and the rest of his life was just like that. I don't know where the lines are, but I want to tell you something, parents. I don't want to make mistakes to where I'll lose my children because I expose them to things that will pull them away from God. And I know that everyone has to look through all of this themselves, but you need to listen to me. If we could only know, if Charles could have only known. And by the way, the saddest thing is, when Charles was at the end of his life, you can read his writings, he realized what he had done. But it's too late. Too late. I have no desire that my kids be considered famous. I want them to be considered godly. You know, I'm not saying that my boys would have ever been NBA players or anything, but I do know one thing. Trent, when Nathan was like 15, and he was 6'6" and about 220 pounds, that was before you ever came around, Trent, but he could dunk the ball. I mean, the guys in the gym would just grab him and hold him. I love basketball. He liked basketball. But I remember a guy that his son had played for Bobby Knight at Indiana. And the guy's son had been killed in a wreck a few years before that. He'd been on... Indiana used to have a freshman team earlier on. Bobby Knight. And then they changed it to just... So this guy had played for Bobby Knight as a freshman, and then he was killed in a wreck. His dad would come to the gym where Trent and I played, and he would walk around. And this is when Nathan was just like 15 and be playing with those guys. And he was so upset with me. He said, "You're not being fair to that boy. You need to have that boy in school where he can play ball because he has ability." Now, at 15, he was 6'6", and what that guy didn't know is Nathan didn't grow anymore. But a lot of times kids do. And he was looking at him at 15, 6'6", probably thought he would keep going. And he just ragged at me. And I said, "Sir, we enjoy coming in here to play, but this isn't what we're living for." You see, I was living for Nathan to be involved in the youth ministry, in the bus ministry, in the church ministry. And I knew that you can't do all that and do both. But I have parents over the years that I've talked to that they think I'm a fanatic for talking like I am. But I now have lived long enough to see the proof in the pudding. If we could only know what some of the decisions we make will do. But we can do it, and then when the chickens come home to roost, it's too late. Their heart has been taken. Their interest has been taken over here. Friends, my children are grown and they love the Lord. I have 21 grandkids, and I'm smart enough to know lots of things can happen. And I'm not the boss of those grandkids, but I want to tell you something, friend. Every single thing in me, everything I can say to my kids, everything I can say at the preaching, I'm going to let them know that I don't give one care if they're great athletes, if they're great musicians, if they're great scholars. All of that, if it's used for God, has value. But I'll tell you something. When the emphasis is there at the expense of godliness, we are making a huge mistake. If we could only know. And I've lived long enough to see the results of that, and it's heartbreaking. He said, "If thy peace is hid from thine eyes." I have watched parents that let 16-year-old kids hold hands, walk around with each other with their arms around each other. And when God has made man and woman to be attracted to each other sexually, that's God's plan. And when you have kids that aren't nearly at the point of marriage, you don't too long just hold hands and have your arm around and a little kiss. That rarely stops there. It's like, you ever seen those magnets, those two little dogs that are on magnets, and you go like this and all of a sudden they're together? That's exactly what happens, and I watch parents that seem so naive about that. And the chances of their kids staying moral is maybe not zero, but it's not very good. And parents don't like to hear me say this, but 90% of the time I'm right on. And they don't admit it till later, till they're adults. They can still be virgins, technically, and be as immoral as can be, and they didn't mean to do that. But they never realized the awesome, forceful power that God has put within us. That's to be fulfilled in marriage, and marriage alone. But I am amazed. I was on the youth committee for years at youth camp. I was a quiz master for many years. And I watched our holiness kids come and what the parents allowed. And I thought, you don't have any idea what's going to happen here. Most of the time, they never get through it with purity. And if they're virgins, it's because they're technically virgins. If we could only know. If we could only know. If we could only know the things that will steal our peace. And then their marriages don't work out. And on and on and on. And now that I have pastored for 47 consecutive years. And I've pastored long enough and watched long enough that I'm not afraid to say I know what I'm talking about. I'm absolutely positive I know what I'm talking about. And I have parents that will never face up to it because their kids put so much pressure on them. And some of them, they've lost them by the time they're teenagers. They're never going to control them. If they could only know. You know, I remember my good friend, his dad had been saved in our church a number of years before, and was a board member. And my good friend and I lifted weights together. Bobby, I don't want to tell you his name or anything, but part of our church. And we're in church together every Sunday, and I'd go over to his house. And I remember Trent when I was at his house upstairs, and you know the old houses that have the cold air ducts that you can kind of see through? Anybody? I don't know what you have around in Arizona, but our part of the country, you know, and you can kind of look down. It's an old house, and I'm there, and we're together and kind of talk. And downstairs in the kitchen was his mom and dad with some other church people. And they were having lunch. And my parents were on the menu. And they were chewing and chewing. They didn't like this, they didn't like that, and this is a problem. They're all sitting around the table. And my buddy looked at me and shook his head and he said, "Ignore it, Joe. They do that all the time." Now, these are people in a holiness church that come to church and hold their hand up to worship, profess to be holiness people, and yet my buddy says, "They do that all the time, Joe. Talk like that all the time." Now, if I ask you to guess if my buddy's anywhere near serving the Lord today, would you want to take a guess? I'm not saying that he couldn't be serving the Lord, but he represents so many. Parents could only know what they do behind closed doors, their values, the things they say, the things that are important to them, if they had any idea what that will bring. But they don't, until it's too late. If they could only know. Jesus said, if you could only know the visitation of your peace, but it's hidden from your eyes. And for whatever reason, they can't understand. And sometimes they do it with their kids there at the table. And just sit there and criticize and freely share all their negativism. And then they say, wonder why the kids aren't interested in taking the old-fashioned way of sweet holiness. Or the kids know where the parents really, their values are, where they really spend their time, where they spend their money, where they spend their interest. Oh, they come to church, pretty much. But not enough to touch the palate of that kid to make them want to go, oh, I want to serve Jesus with all of my heart. Because a lot of the parents, they're second-generation Christians. Their parents and grandparents were much more in tune with God than they are. If they could only know what that next generation will be like, it might put enough fear to seek God with all of our heart. We finished our ministry in Michigan. We were there 4 years. And we were going to come to where we are now, where we've been 40 years. And a little before we were to leave, it was vacation time. And really, I was exhausted. And I was ready to... I was just ready. And there was a camp meeting in Canada. My wife's a Canadian. And we were looking forward to going to that. And so I have 2 children at that time. I have Stephen, who's 3, and Stephanie, who just was turning 1 in a few days. And we're getting everything together to take off for Niagara Falls. That's where the camp meeting was. And I'm ready. And so we had a little problem with ants. I don't mean uncles and aunts, but ants, that crawl around. So Sharon had gotten a bottle of, I think it's called Terrell or something like that. Anybody ever heard of that? Of ant poisoning. It's just in a little bottle. And so just before we headed out the door, what she did is she took and she shook out a drop of that, a good-sized drop of that, on a brown grocery bag, about as big around as a nickel. And then put it under the sink, and we're leaving. But little Stephanie, who's just turning 1, quick as a flash, reached there and grabbed it and put it in her mouth. Now, Sharon saw it immediately. As soon as it was in her mouth, pried her mouth open, pulled that out. Got it out. And she said, well, honey, I think maybe I better call poison. My wife's a registered nurse. Retired registered nurse. Used to be a registered nurse. She wants you to know that chapter's over. She enjoyed it. That was a season of life. And so she said, honey, I better call poison control. And I said, sure. So she calls poison control, and that's in Grand Rapids, Michigan, about 30 miles the other way. And she comes to me and she said, Joe, poison control said we need to give her some Epicat. Anybody know what that is? You give it to a child. I don't think they do it now. I think they've changed. But you give it to them, make them vomit. It does make them upchuck. Little liquid. And poison control said, give her that. We had some. And then come on in to Grand Rapids to the hospital and be checked out. I didn't like that. My wife's a nurse. She paid good money to be a nurse. A registered nurse. That's why it was one of the attractive, no. And I said, honey, okay, let's give her the Epipac and let's watch her. Because she looks fine. She's not having any problems. And you're a nurse. Keep your eye on her. But, Cher, if we turn around and go back there, you know how those hospitals are? You'll sit in the waiting room for hours. And I'm ready for vacation. And you will watch her. We know, let's give her that and have her throw up. She said, well, Joe, this is not my expertise. And poison control said we should bring her in. And to be honest, Trent, it didn't thrill me. I was anxious to get out of there to Niagara Falls. And I said, honey, we do that, and all we'll do is drive 30 miles that way and sit in that waiting room until they kind of check her out, and then we'll have to go. And she said, well, this is not my expertise. We better do what they say. And because, though Sharon is quiet, she has a stubborn streak, I gave in. And I said, okay, all right, we'll do it. And we gave her the stuff, and the little girl, and then she wasn't upset. Little Stephanie's just fine. We drove to Grand Rapids. Stephanie's just as fine as any little girl could be. And it was exactly like I thought. They took Stephanie in, and Sharon and I sat there, and it's just like I thought. We sat there, and we sat there, and we sat there. And I'm ready to go. Let's head out for vacation. After what seemed like a long time, the door opened, and a doctor came out, and he was not smiling. He said, are you Mr. and Mrs. Smith? I said, yes. He said, you are very fortunate you brought this girl here. Now, I don't remember numbers, but all of us have a little bit of arsenic in us, from what I've heard. A little bit in our system. But her numbers were way out there. He said, now, if you had not brought her in, there's a good chance she would have died. But he said if she hadn't have died, what would have happened was it would have worked on her organs, and she would have been in real trouble for the rest of her life. Now, he said the only thing we can do is admit her and begin to give her shots to bind the arsenic and let it begin to work its way out of her body. I didn't care about Niagara Falls. I didn't care about vacation. I didn't care about that at all. First of all, I felt like an idiot for the way I'd acted. And I'm so glad that Sharon took her stand. I've known some couples that spiritually this very thing happened. One of the parents were spiritual enough and alive enough that they tried to stop some of the things the other parent was allowing or doing, and often didn't get done. Now, if I would have forced Sharon onto vacation, and Stephanie would be alive today, and Trent would know that here I had a daughter in a wheelchair, not much of so many problems and so many things, and he would find out why that girl was there, that her immature dad that felt like, and I honestly have to admit this, I wasn't impressed with poison control. I had a nurse. And there wasn't anything. You looked at my daughter, she looked fine. And I'm wanting to go on vacation. If you would know that about me, you might struggle just a little bit. Right? But friends, if my daughter would have died, she would be with Jesus today. She would be safe. But I know some people that have so acted themselves, they have been so unsettled spiritually themselves, they have been so superficial themselves, and they're poisoning their kids. And they don't even know it. In our holiness movement, there are parents that are actually proud of some of the achievements of their worldly kids going against obeying God because they're successful. Oh, friends, we need to open our eyes to eternity. If we could only know. And some will not know till we get to the judgment. And then they see what their own double-mindedness, their own tendency toward worldliness, their own criticisms toward others. There are churches where there are kids that can never be helped by other spiritual people because their parents have chewed on the spiritual people's faults. Friends, we all have faults. Every one of us. And all you got to do is sit around your home and chew on that, and you've stopped that child from ever being able to be helped. There are preachers that preach. And there are teenagers that sit in the congregation that don't want to hear a thing they say, and it's because of the things their parents chew at all week at home. It's tragic. If they could only know. And that's what Jesus said. He said, not only, I want you just to look at something that just really is scary to me. Look at verse 44. And shall lay thee even with the ground, and listen, and thy children within thee. Friends, there's too much at stake for any parent or any grandparent to have less than a pure heart. We talk about pure hearts. We talk about entire sanctification. We talk about being totally the Lord's. Do our children and grandchildren see that lived out in our life behind closed doors? So often they don't. I've pastored too many years to hear too many that have grown up that said, I don't want anything to do with that. If we could only know. Friends, we're not going to get out of this without making mistakes. Every one of us, from this preacher to you, we're terribly human. But oh, that God would help us, that He would help us. Well, friends, I've delivered my heart to you tonight. And I understand that this is not the most joyous way to end a series of services. But if we could only know what's at stake, I would suspect that even in this small crowd, there would be some that would want to come and say, "Oh God, I'm sorry." Let's just stand. Trent, is there something that maybe we could sing, and I'll turn it over to you?